It was July 1973, on a remote location in Almería, Spain. Charles Bronson was filming a Western, playing his usual role as a man of violence operating by a personal code. The production had hired local children as extras for a village scene, including a 12-year-old boy named Miguel, whose family needed the money. It was 104 degrees in the Andalusian desert. They'd been shooting for 6 hours. In the middle of a take, Miguel collapsed. The assistant director called cut immediately and moved toward the boy, but Bronson was already there, kneeling beside him, cradling Miguel's head while the boy struggled to breathe. The director, still thinking about schedule and budget, called from his position. "Charles, we need to reset. Medical is coming." Bronson didn't move. He looked at the director once, just once, with an expression that said everything without words. Then he turned back to Miguel, speaking quietly in the broken Spanish he'd learned growing up in Pennsylvania coal country, among immigrant workers. Production stopped. The schedule meant nothing. The scene meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was the child struggling to breathe in his arms. This is not a story about heroism or publicity or even about kindness. This is about recognizing when performance ends and humanity begins. Understanding that some moments require putting down the role you're playing and choosing the human cost over the professional cost without hesitation. In 1973, Charles Bronson was 52 years old and had spent a lifetime understanding what poverty, struggle, and survival actually meant. He hadn't grown up comfortable, then discovered hardship through research for roles. He'd lived it. One of 15 children in a Lithuanian immigrant family in Pennsylvania mining country. His father had died when Charles was 10, forcing him into the mines to help support his siblings. He'd known hunger, real hunger, not the Hollywood kind. He'd worn his sister's hand-me-down dress to school because it was the only clothing available. He'd survived World War II as a tail gunner, flying 25 missions where men died in metal tubes at 30,000 feet. Nothing about Bronson's understanding of suffering was theoretical or performed. The production filming in Almería was typical of early 70s international westerns. American star, European director, Spanish locations, local crews and extras. The economics worked because shooting in Spain was cheaper than America, and local children could be hired for minimal pay to populate village scenes. Miguel's family, like many in rural Almería, depended on occasional film work to supplement subsistence farming. When production came through hiring extras, whole families signed up. Miguel's mother had brought him to the location at dawn, proud he'd been selected, needing the money his work would provide. The day had been brutal from the start. The Andalusian sun in July is unforgiving, and film productions push through heat because stopping costs money. Crew members were drinking water constantly, seeking shade between takes. The actors in period costume with multiple layers suffered more. Bronson wore dark clothing, typical for his character, which absorbed heat mercilessly. He'd been a professional long enough to manage, hydrate excessively, rest in shade whenever possible, pace himself. But the child extras, excited to be part of a movie, didn't have that experience. They stood where they were told, wore what they were given, performed take after take without complaining because their families needed the work. Miguel had been positioned in the village square for a scene where Bronson's character rode through on horseback. Simple background work, nothing demanding, but it required standing in full sun while the scene was shot from multiple angles. First take, second take, third take. Technical problems with the camera required resetting. Miguel stood waiting with the other children, trying to do his job properly. Bronson, between takes, had noticed the boy swaying slightly, but assumed he was just tired. Everyone was tired. The heat affected everyone. Then, during the fourth take, as Bronson rode through the scene, Miguel dropped, not gracefully, not like someone sitting down from fatigue. He collapsed, his legs giving out completely, his small body hitting the dusty ground hard. The assistant director's voice cracked the air. "Cut. Medical." But Bronson was already off his horse, already moving toward Miguel with surprising speed for a man his age in heavy costume. He reached the boy before anyone else, kneeling beside him, immediately cradling Miguel's head to prevent it from striking ground again. Miguel's eyes were open but unfocused. His breathing was rapid and shallow. His skin was hot to the touch, but also dry. No sweat, a dangerous sign. Bronson recognized it immediately. Heat exhaustion, possibly heat stroke. Not just tired, genuinely in danger. Bronson pulled off his jacket and wadded it under Miguel's head, then removed his vest to fan the boy's face. The medic arrived within a minute, professional and efficient. He began checking Miguel's vitals, asking questions in Spanish that Bronson couldn't fully follow but understood the urgency of. The diagnosis came quickly: heat exhaustion, severe dehydration, borderline heat stroke. Miguel needed immediate cooling, fluids, and probably hospital observation. The medic called for the ambulance that was always on standby for film productions. Then the director's voice, tense with production concerns. "Charles, we've got the shot. Medical's handling it. We need to reset for the next scene while we have the light." Bronson didn't respond. He stayed kneeling beside Miguel, one hand on the boy's shoulder, speaking quietly in his limited Spanish. "Está bien, Doctor aquí. Madre viene." "It's okay. Doctor here. Mother coming." His voice carried the same calm he brought to dangerous film scenes, but this wasn't performance. This was a man who understood fear and was trying to ease it in a child. The director tried again, louder. "Charles, we're losing light. Medical has this handled. We need you in position." Bronson looked up at the director. The expression on his face wasn't anger exactly. It was something colder and more absolute. It said, "I'm not moving." The director, reading that look, made a calculation. Pushing harder might create a confrontation that would cost more time than just waiting. "Fine. 20-minute break." Everyone in shade. The crew dispersed gratefully, seeking relief from the heat, but Bronson stayed with Miguel. When the boy's mother arrived, frantic with worry, Bronson stood and stepped back to give her space. Through broken Spanish and gesture, he tried to explain what had happened, to assure her that Miguel would be okay, that the medical care was good. The mother, overwhelmed, started thanking him profusely. Bronson shook his head, uncomfortable with gratitude for something that felt basic. He turned to the production assistant hovering nearby. "Make sure they get to the hospital. Make sure the family doesn't pay anything. Production covers all costs. And make sure they know Miguel's pay isn't affected. Full day's rate regardless." The assistant director, overhearing, started to object. "Charles, we can't set precedent of paying people who don't complete their work." Bronson's response was quiet but absolute. "Miguel was working when heat exhaustion hit. That's a workplace injury. Production's responsibility. He gets paid. Family gets hospital covered. This isn't negotiable." The weight in his voice made clear that arguing would be pointless. The assistant director nodded, made notes, moved on. The ambulance arrived shortly after. As the medics prepared to transport Miguel, Bronson approached once more. He pulled out his wallet, removed what looked like several $100s in Spanish pesetas, and pressed it into the mother's hand. She tried to refuse, overwhelmed, but Bronson closed her fingers around the money. "Para el hospital, para la familia." For the hospital, for the family. As the ambulance drove away, the production manager approached Bronson. "We need to talk about finishing today's schedule." Bronson looked at him with the same cold expression he'd given the director. "How many other children are in today's scenes?" The manager checked his paperwork. 4 in the next setup, 3 in the final scene. "How long have they been in the sun?" "Since we started. 6 hours about." "Send them home. Full pay. We're done using children today." The manager started calculating cost. "Charles, we lose 2 scenes if we send the children home." We'll need to schedule a reshoot. Bring everyone back. That's send them home, Bronson repeated. We're adults. We chose this work. They're children who need money for their families. We're not risking another collapse for a schedule. The manager looked at the director, who'd been standing close enough to hear. The director, recognizing that Bronson wasn't going to continue filming while children remained at risk, nodded. Send the children home. We'll adjust the schedule. Within 30 minutes, all the child extras were released with full days' pay despite incomplete work. Their parents, arriving to collect them, were confused by the early dismissal until crew members explained what had happened. Word spread quickly among the local community. The American actor had stopped production to protect their children. The story would be retold in that region for decades. Production continued without the children, shooting what could be shot with adult extras and adjusted angle. The day ended 2 hours early, because key scenes couldn't be completed without reshoots. The production manager calculated the cost, lost shooting time, scheduled reshoot, extra payments to child extras, tens of thousands of dollars. He presented the numbers to Bronson that evening, perhaps hoping the actor would feel guilty about the financial impact. Bronson looked at the figures without expression. How's Miguel? The manager, caught off guard by the question, checked his notes. Hospital kept him overnight for observation. Dehydration and heat exhaustion confirmed. He'll recover fully. Good, Bronson said, and handed back the cost breakdown without another word about the money. The reshoot was scheduled for a cooler morning 2 weeks later. This time, production implemented new protocols, mandatory shade breaks every 30 minutes for child extras, unlimited water access, medical checks before and after each scene. The changes cost more money and time, but became standard practice for that production company going forward. The insurance company, reviewing what had happened, noted that Bronson's immediate response had likely prevented a more serious incident that would have cost significantly more in liability and delays. Miguel returned for the reshoot, fully recovered. When he saw Bronson, he ran to him with a child's unself-conscious affection. Bronson knelt down, said something in Spanish that made Miguel smile, then stood and returned to professional mode. The scene was shot successfully in the cooler morning conditions. Miguel's family, afterwards, tried again to thank Bronson. He accepted their gratitude with visible discomfort, deflecting praise, treating what he'd done as unremarkable. The crew never forgot what they'd witnessed, not the stopping production. That was dramatic but understandable. What stayed with them was Bronson's face as he knelt beside Miguel. The absolute focus, the lack of self-awareness or performance. The transformation from Charles Bronson, the movie star, to just a man helping a child in distress. One camera operator said years later, "I'd worked with Bronson on 3 films, always professional, always prepared, never warm exactly, but fair. That day in Almería, I saw someone different, not the tough guy he played on screen, not the star protecting his image, just a man who'd lived hard enough to recognize genuine suffering and refused to tolerate it for something as meaningless as a film schedule." The story spread through film industry circles, but never became public legend, the way some Hollywood humanitarian stories do. Bronson never mentioned it in interviews, never used it for publicity, never allowed it to become part of his carefully guarded public image. The people who were there told it quietly, among professionals, as an example of the difference between performing humanity and actually being human. Miguel's family, when journalists discovered the story decades later and tried to interview them, confirmed the basics but protected details. Bronson had helped their son. He'd stopped production to ensure Miguel's safety. He'd paid medical costs and given money to the family. They honored his privacy by not exploiting the story for attention. The film Bronson was making that day in Almería was completed successfully. It performed adequately at the box office, was neither hit nor failure, and is mostly forgotten today, except by genre enthusiasts. But the people who worked on it, particularly those who witnessed what happened with Miguel, remember it as the production where Charles Bronson proved that his working-class background wasn't publicity, mythology, or character research. It was real. He'd grown up poor enough to understand when a family desperately needed money. He'd known enough suffering to recognize it in a child's face. He'd survived enough hardship to understand the difference between inconvenience and genuine danger. Years later, a journalist researching Bronson's life discovered the Almeria story and asked about it during an interview. Bronson's response was characteristically brief. A child collapsed from heat. Production stopped until he was safe. That's how it should work. The journalist pressed for details, trying to get emotional content, heroic narrative, something that would make compelling copy. Bronson gave him nothing. It was hot. The boy needed help. We helped. What else is there to say? What else indeed? In Bronson's worldview, shaped by genuine hardship rather than performed empathy, helping someone in distress wasn't heroism requiring explanation. It was basic human responsibility. The only remarkable thing about stopping production to help Miguel was that anyone considered it remarkable. Today, Miguel is in his 60s, living in Almeria, working as a teacher. He tells his students sometimes about the day he worked on a movie, and the American actor who stopped everything to make sure he was safe. He doesn't tell it as a celebrity story. He tells it as a lesson about recognizing when professional obligations should yield to human ones. The moment when Charles Bronson chose a 12-year-old boy's safety over production schedule, budget concerns, and career considerations wasn't captured on film. No cameras recorded Bronson kneeling in the dust, cradling a sick child, refusing to move until he knew Miguel would be okay. But everyone who saw it understood they'd witnessed something that mattered more than any scene Bronson filmed that day. The moment when a man known for playing tough guys revealed the toughness that actually matters, choosing human welfare over professional success, without hesitation or self-congratulation. If this story made you think about the choices we make when no one's watching and nothing's at stake except doing right, consider subscribing. Have you ever seen someone choose human need over professional pressure?